Mr. Postman. Vikram Iyer, we are live on Facebook. How are we doing today?
Not bad, not bad. A little bit more excited now that I'm with you, man. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Well, first off, this is the 11th episode of the Re-Leaders podcast. And Re-Leaders, this is who it's brought to you by. And Re-Leaders magazine is the world's first sustainable business and leadership magazine, all in efforts to inspire better leaders for a better world. And today we have on a better leader for a better world, Vikram Iyer. And Vikram is the Vice President of Global Public Policy and Strategic Communications, correct me if I'm wrong, Vikram, of Postmates.
That's right. That's right. I based out in San Francisco. For anyone that's used Postmates before, this is where corporate headquarters is, and this is where the burrito delivery magic happens.
The burrito delivery magic. See, and that's and just to give some viewers some backgrounds about how we met, I was able to attend the Concordia Annual Summit in New York 2 weeks ago, and Vikram was there, and they kind of threw me to the wolves and said, "Hey, you're going to interview this guy today." And we were able to meet and talk, and I got to learn a lot about Postmates because Vikram, as I told you, I kind of had the idea, this is a great app that I can use as a college student on a lazy Sunday to have, some pizza or have some Gatorade or, a couple Band-Aids delivered for me. But it turns out, folks, they're more than just, pizza and Band-Aids. They're doing a lot of things for our economy and commerce itself. So Vikram, that's kind of what I want to jump into today and kind of just first ask you is how is Postmates changing the economy?
It's a great question, and I think as more and more of us become very, very accustomed to the economies and applications and products of convenience, we may overlook what kind of reverberating impacts we're really having on the communities and neighborhoods around us. We tap a button here and we're in a car and we're heading to a friend's house. We tap a button there and we've got groceries delivered. Tap a button there and you have a lazy Sunday meal on your lap in your couch. So all of these types of transactions, first and foremost, are revolutionizing commerce. And it's not just the way it moves. It's not just the fact that you can tap a button and have something instantly on demand within an hour, or for some other companies within a few days, arrive at your office or your home. It's the fact that now all of a sudden the way local businesses, we're not talking about the big box behemoth retailers of the world, but just the hardware store down the street, the local taqueria that has your favorite nachos, the local bakery that has your favorite cupcakes and coffee, all of these different companies who maybe once upon a time felt that they didn't have a footing in the digital economy, because of Postmates, because of on-demand technologies, now all of a sudden they're able to. And it's actually for a fairly simple reason. If you take a large e-commerce platform like an Amazon.com, hyper convenient, folks all use it, but the difference is, and arguably the problem that's posed to a lot of communities and a lot of local businesses in your community or my community, is that when Amazon builds a warehouse on the outskirts of cities and then funnels goods from that warehouse into town, it shortchanges your or my ability to go across the street in person and actually solicit that hardware store to get those light bulbs. That's actually fueling a lot of decline in retail, not just in the US, but around the world. What Postmates does is the inverse approach of that model. We treat the entire city as a warehouse. We index the product offerings of what's being sold, and then we give local businesses the tools they need to distribute those goods as if they were a warehouse. So now all of a sudden your favorite restaurant has access to Postmates' incredible mapping algorithm and matching algorithm and network of 170,000 Postmates, much like Lyft drivers are online at any given time looking out for you to, ask, how is that method of commerce changing our economies? Well, we issued our first economic impact report as a company earlier this year. Anyone can find it at postmates.com/impact. And it actually showed that for those businesses that were using on-demand tools to deliver in real time, they were actually able to sell over $1.2 billion worth of goods within the United States last year. That's local retail that's going back into your community. And that's obviously being taxed with the local sales tax. We're not avoiding that tax like I know other business models have been critiqued for. And that's broadening the income base of that city to grow and thrive. And then we get reinvested in the economy. At the same time, that resulted in about 6.6 billion of follow-on economic growth. If you can imagine a local mom and pop store that's able to sell more and grows at a 200%, 300% volume because they're able to access a new customer base that they've never accessed before, then they're able to hire more. They're not only able to transact more, but they're also able to open more storefronts. So all in all, we're proud of the math and we're proud of those numbers. But what we're really proud of is we're able to give local retailers, small businesses, and those that feel that they're overlooked by technology a place in the digital economy through a platform like Postmates.
Right, and it's so simple. I have a friend, he gets this Postmates app, he signs up, he does the background check, and instantly he's able to have funds in his pocket that day. And so it's not even just as impacting retail like you're saying, it's also impacting the everyday person. And kind of the transition I want to make is to that gig economy. The gig economy, at least how I've had it explained to me, and I'm not going to pretend like I'm an expert on it, but people that can, tap on and come onto a job and be self-employed, they get their 1099, and they are able to make money working a side job or working something else through technology. So I'm allowed to go in the Uber, I'm allowed to go in the Lyft, I'm allowed to go in the Postmates and use my car as a service, use my house for Airbnb. So what are you seeing in the gig economy, and what are you seeing for people using the application? Are you increasing your numbers every single month? Are more people able to get an additional revenue off of this? What are you seeing?
Yeah, it's it's an interesting concept for the actual individuals who work on the platform. That's who you're interested in talking about, right? The Postmates themselves. Yeah. So the company, first and foremost, is named after our workforce, our Postmates. And I think without them, quite fundamentally, we wouldn't be able to access our goods in the way that we have been conveniently and in a revolutionary way in the last few years. So going back to the numbers again, our Postmates on average in 2017 actually pulled in about $218 million in total earnings. On average, they're making about $18.34 per hour. Sometimes it ranges between $16 and $18.34 when they're actually on a job, they've accepted a delivery and they're making that delivery. And that is actually 153% of the minimum wage for a worker in this country, certainly the federal minimum wage. And so when you think about that, and then you pair on the following fact, for Postmates, about 80% of our workforce, our Postmates, are actually working 20 hours a week or less. A lot of them are college students. They are entrepreneurs in their own right. They might be young parents. They may be individuals that are saving up for a wedding ring. We actually had an example of a Postmate that we highlighted on our blog that actually used extra income from his Postmates work in the evenings after he would get off of his day job working on behalf of the LA Auto Show and saved up for his wedding ring. So all of these different types of personalities out there are really important to understand because there will always be the instance of someone who is trying to earn, certainly to make ends meet. There's also the instance of an individual who's trying to earn because they're new to a city and they want to explore it. There'll be the instance of somebody who's trying to earn because they're trying to put towards money towards a down payment, and so on and so forth. So the faces of the gig economy are quite varied. I think that when we think about on-demand apps, sharing economy apps like Lyft, like Postmates, like Uber or even Airbnb, there might be these archetypes of who is participating on the worker side. And these are veterans. These are immigrant college students. These are your neighbors. These are friends and family that you see in your own life. And I think that's a really, really important point because when we're talking about the state of the economy right now, we can talk about how the stock market is doing. We can take a look at the White House job numbers that come out every month. But what we're also realizing in this country is there's a skills gap. You know, as jobs become more digitized and the knowledge economy opens up, we need to invest in workforce training for individuals of all backgrounds. There's also, you know, wage stagnation that's occurring. Even if unemployment is low and job track and labor force participation is strong, there still seems to be a widening gulf between those that are higher income earners versus lower income earners. So what's really powerful for Postmates is that you can actually use this as a bridge for opportunities around the rest of your life. You can use it to supplement other incomes that you may be drawing in. That being said, there is an entirely different conversation that we should be having as a country on those points that I mentioned. If access to capital and wage stagnation is a real threat, we should be talking about instant access to capital that doesn't involve predatory loans or payday lending. That's why, to your earlier point, someone can now, we just rolled this feature out last week, so I'm glad we're able to talk about this today. Someone can now sign up to be a Postmate. Once they're registered and they're up and running, there's a new feature we have called instant deposit that allows you to get those goods, that cash into your bank account that same day. So this is when we're talking about somebody who might have a $400 medical expense that pops up overnight, and we as an economy are accustomed to a 2-week pay period or pay cycle, or you feel like you need to go to get a payday loan for that emergency bill. These on-demand opportunities are a lower barrier to entry to deal with that $400 problem. But if we're also talking about a skills issue in America, as jobs, as I was mentioning earlier, as jobs change, we also feel at Postmates that we're in a very unique position in which we understand a wide swath of demographics of the types of workers that work in the on-demand economy. And that's why just last month in September, just a few weeks back, we actually matriculated our first class of Postmates into a program called JBS, which is a career pathways program funded in part with grants through the U.S. Department of Labor that allows everybody from someone who is an Air Force vet who is trying to figure out what they want to do in life, get access to job training programs, to the person who really wants to get smart at Salesforce and customer relations management softwares and wants to be a little sharper at those, you know, higher end skills, and everyone in between, to see how can we both use the on-demand earning opportunity and have Postmates take its ownership and responsibility for investing in the development of our workforce. And I think what we're going to see more and more of from platforms like this in this space is a real ownership and understanding of our responsibility to invest in the upward mobility of those that happen to perform services on the platform. So whether that's instant deposits as one example to access your cash quick and on demand, whether that's workforce development training, whether it's open enrollment and healthcare navigation resources, as the Obamacare exchanges are just opening up for those to sign up for healthcare. That whole slew and battery of principles of investing both on your capital, on your education and well-being, on your health and your healthcare certainty, all of those things are coming together and coming to bear for workers on our platform. And, you know, we're just getting started and we're really interested in doing more.
Wow, you know, that's a lot. And I just want to recap that. So first we talked about mom and pop stores, retailers that are seeing the ability to, compete with the Walmarts of the world, the Amazon of the world, by having their products and using technology that have Postmate drivers deliver to somebody on demand. Then we talked about the drivers themselves, the gig economy. 80% of your drivers are people that are working 20+ hour weeks. Some are college students. We talked about they're female dominant. And then you threw at me the JBS career pathway. You're enabling Air Force vets. You're enabling people to get an education and to be educated on certain things that are going on in the industry and going on in the world. So jobs are changing, and the upward mobility of everything that's going on with Postmates is having a big impact on the economy. And so as the vice president of global public policy, what does that look like? Full-time employees are the only ones receiving benefits, and how do we work together to help out, our society?
Yeah. So this is a really, really important question, particularly because we're at a point in time where, for the first time in a number of years, basically since the first dot-com era of the 90s, and even now in the second era of a very rich digital economy, an explosion of apps, for a period of time, tech wasn't necessarily in the news by way of lawmaker scrutiny until very recently. Tech was celebrated for all of the awesome opportunities it created, the way it was not only reimagining the world with products like Google Search and Google Maps and the iPhone and everything else in between, but it also was, creating a new swath of knowledge workers and new job opportunities and pulling, recent college grads away from traditional, highly coveted jobs like working at an investment bank out on the East Coast to actually thinking about maybe working at a biotech lab up in Boston, or starting their own startup at a Georgia Tech down in Atlanta, or coming out to Silicon Valley. And so tech has not only changed the landscape of the way we live, it's also changed the landscape of almost every facet of our day-to-day lives. When you leave the house, you may be inputting data about how you want your thermostat to be set, just so that way the house is cool or warm when you exit or leave. When you actually get into your car, there's GPS data that may be guiding you to how to get to your next meeting. Certainly, when you think about Postmates and on-demand delivery, a merchant, a local business that's using it can see that there's order demands that spike for a certain type of warm soup or warm beverage, just so to understand how their inventory works. And I mention all this because in each of these cases, you have a lot of data, you have a lot of information, you also have a lot of intrigue about how that information is packaged. Certainly, just a few weeks ago, we've seen, and over the arc of the last couple of months, executives from Twitter, from Facebook, from Google go and testify in front of Congress about how these things are responsibly maintained and looked after in a way that creates a level playing field. And you have, out of a range of issues, whether it's internet neutrality, privacy, workforce development, like I was mentioning before, the future of work in an automated economy, how you regulate driverless cars. When every part of a product, whether it's consumer product or business product, has a digital backend, you now have a very interested, not only a set of federal legislators out in Washington, D.C., but certainly state and local entities of the public sector and of government that are interested in how you add rules to this so that way there's smart growth, how you add rules to this so that way there's fair practices, how you add taxes to it so that way folks are paying their fair share. And that is really demanding that business, not just tech, but business, invest and pay close attention to how those relationships work. Now, what's happening to the part of your question is that, as I mentioned a few years ago, no one was viewing technology necessarily in this way. They were just in awe of a lot of these products. Now, as you have more and more of the eye of different policies and regulations swirling around these tech platforms, it could not be more vital for these companies to work alongside these legislators. Government must build a greater sense of empathy for these companies and really understand how the product works, and not just assume that liking on a button on Facebook is just a matter of liking a button on Facebook, but really understand behind that. And in that same breath, business and tech must build a greater sense of empathy for government, have an understanding of the different disparate interests that they're trying to balance, and not necessarily treat them as entities that are intentionally trying to stand in their way, but rather partners who you could work with to not spar with, but actually create really smart and balanced regulation. So for Postmates, we spent a lot of time investing not only in Washington, D.C., but certainly trying our best to work with mayors, work with state legislators, and work with governors. And it's paying some really interesting dividends along the way.
Definitely. So, we talked about automation, and how that's impacting public policy, what the future of commerce is going to look like in terms of these big tech giants coming in and working with the government. Right now, I want to kind of pass it to our fans. This is kind of popping up. One of our fans, Noah Williford, he asks, can you explain what the civics labs do? You were talking about how we need to have some more empathy. What is, and correct me if I'm wrong, hopefully civic labs relates to Postmates. But
yeah, absolutely.
What are the civic labs? What do they do?
Yeah, it's a great question. Postmates Civic Labs is our social impact arm for the company, and it's actually led by my amazing colleague Disney, who has actually over the arc of the last year built three component parts of the program. One, we try and figure out ways that our own employee base can better engage the community around us. Two, we try and say, how can we use the Postmates product and the sort of superpower of our logistics network for good in the community? And then three is, how do we actually invest in that long-term economic mobility that I was mentioning earlier on sort of the workforce side for our 170,000 Postmates? Let me just start with what I think is the most exciting, and that's that middle pillar of how do you take the product and actually use it for good in the community. Right now, as many people may use Postmates to get food delivered to their homes or offices or wherever they fancy, we also know that a lot of food is wasted in America day in and day out. That it not only comes from leftover food from a restaurant, but maybe even when you finish lunch earlier today, maybe you didn't want the second half of your sandwich and you tossed it out. What we're trying to do down in Los Angeles, and here's where the labs component comes in, is start an experiment. We're working with a few partners down there to actually route and pick up leftover food from our merchant partners in one of our biggest markets for all of the Postmates platform. It's our #1 market share compared to any other app out there, and route those leftover foods to local homeless shelters and local community organizations in need. Once we sort of see how to fine tune that by using not only the second and third side of our marketplace, the merchant partner, and then the courier to help drop it off, depending on how smoothly that goes, and we'll refine it, we seek to broaden that out and kind of scale that up nationally.
How scalable is that? I mean, you're fighting food insecurity here. This is a big topic that when someone thinks of Postmates, they may not think of a company doing and having some social impact like that. How scalable is this? And is the future bright for the Civic Labs?
Absolutely. I mean, first of all, we have to give an amazing credit to our CEO, Bastian Lehman, and his co-founder, Sean Place, for giving us the runway to experiment with this in a unique way. And I'll say that very clearly, this is indeed an experiment. We've already seen amazing interest from our merchant partners to want to participate in this. And we have amazing partners on the ground in LA that are helping scale up this program within Los Angeles. So we're really excited about the prospect of this program. But you know what? We're not going to promise everyone the world. I think it's really important to build out these programs in a sustainable way, and frankly, in a way that matches the characteristics and attributes of the city. The way in which food gets transported and delivered based off of the needs of the LA underserved community may be very different than how we envision something like this in the Detroit community or in the Baton Rouge community. So I think it's important to definitely understand best practices to scale it. But I will tell you an example of something that is on the verge of scaling quite beautifully. And that is, over the arc of the last year, we've faced some pretty intense environmental natural disasters, ranging from hurricanes Harvey and Irma last year in Texas and Florida, to Napa wildfires, which roared across Northern California, to the Southern California wildfires. And again, there we were looking to actually design a partnership with local emergency management, frontline responders, the mayor's offices, and evacuation shelters, where we were able to use our network of Postmates to actually route essential goods and supplies that were required to those evacuation shelters. So I think for us, this is going to be a really, really important way that we continue to do business in our communities. And once we get refinement of how best to help out a local shelter on the food security side, or help out an evacuation shelter when it comes to disaster relief, then we're actually going to start creating these storefronts in which you or I, as users who may be fortunate in that moment to not live in the eye of that storm, might be able to then actually, in the same way you would check out by buying something on the app for yourself, check out of the app by buying something on the app that local shelter tells us is needed. Maybe it's a blanket, maybe it's a set of batteries. Wow. And I think that's a way in which you can really transform the product at scale, given the elegance of how our entire engineering team has designed this. So we are really excited. I think the future is they're looking to invest in those communities, because you can do amazing things that not only balance your bottom line as a business, but really balance your core identity in terms of your values too.
Absolutely. That's some pretty fascinating stuff. And with all these projects going on, it definitely takes some leadership behind that. And you were saying, we want to go to scale with this so fast because we want to test in a small market and see what works out there. How hard is it? And what advice do you have in terms of leadership, in terms of sticking to a plan and sticking to that North Star, whatever that is? What advice do you have for someone that might have some issues with that, in terms of achieving that goal?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I'll be the first to admit that I certainly do not have all the answers figured out. I'm very fortunate to have a set of leaders here at Postmates, including the CEO Bastian, who's given us a lot of autonomy to kind of fail quickly, reroute, and then keep moving. But I will say this: I think having come to Postmates from years in government and actually, working on behalf of elected officials and having had the chance to work in the Obama administration, you realize that sometimes your biggest asset in trying to get things done and encourage a team to get things done is not actually just the ability to be their boss or to have money in the bank to execute a project. Because sometimes what you need to get something done on the policy team might require resources from the engineering team, or sometimes something that you would need to get done from one agency of the federal government may not necessarily be under the authority of another agency in the federal government. So what you really have to do is, in my opinion, build coalitions and respect process. By that I mean you really need to kind of socialize what it is that you're trying to achieve as a mission and align it with not only the goals of that individual whose help you could use or that business unit whose help you could use, but really what are the goals of the company. So if we're talking about social good and social impact through our social responsibility team, or we're talking about, engaging lawmakers on a piece of legislation or regulation, going to different teams around you, your legal team, your comms team, your product team, and articulating and evangelizing internally what would happen if we engage in a certain way or not in a different way, what that's going to mean for their interests, for our company's bottom line, and the entire team. That is a really, really important set of internal conversations that's important for leaders to have, because sometimes your team doesn't necessarily come with everybody wearing that exact same colored jersey or uniform, because you're each fighting different fights on any given day. So you really need to invest in everyone in your organization who may not even have anything to do with it, to at least inform them of the work that you're doing, make them feel empowered, bring them along in that process, and then hopefully by then have a coalition of the willing who's willing to spend time on your project, even if it's outside of their day job day to day. That to me is coalitions. But when it comes to process, it means that there are a lot of companies as they rapidly grow who see new faces. HR might be onboarding lots of new individual talented contributors day in and day out, particularly when a company is growing at a rapid clip. You may not know everybody, but there may be teams working on things that get formed that are new teams for the company, and they're going to want to weigh in on your product or your project along the way. And I think it's really important for an individual at an organization to keep an eye on, does the legal team need to see this? Does the tax team need to see this? Does the comms and marketing team need to see this? And I think the way in which you can kind of get things done is by empowering everyone, and you can do that by simply engaging everyone along the way.
Yeah, and like you said, I think it's very relatable to not just business, but to anything. Even a basketball team or a small business or in a school. Alignment's so key to any success, and empowering other leaders is also something that we try to do here at Real Leaders. But Vikram, you mentioned a couple of stuff along the way about working in the White House. And I was looking at your bio, stalking you earlier, and you're out there in the White House and doing a lot of cool things. You're at the Wharton School of Business. You've got a pretty nice LinkedIn profile, Vikram. I'm very jealous of it. But what I want to ask is, what advice do you have for aspiring professionals? What is one piece of advice from all your experience that you would like our audience to hear?
Yeah, it's first of all, that's very kind of you to say. It certainly was a team effort, and I'm grateful for any mentor or advocate who stuck their neck out for me along the way. I actually didn't go to Wharton for Business School, but I had an opportunity to have a short-term fellowship there. I think the biggest piece of advice I could have, I think one, it's always take the meeting. make sure that, opportunities around you show up in all different shapes and sizes. And we shouldn't be prejudiced about what a certain background of an organization looks like that we might entertain to join or interview at, in the same way that we shouldn't be prejudiced about the individuals that are around us, that are our neighbors, that are our peers, that are our coworkers. And I think the more and more you show up to meet one another, the broader your base of empathy is. And I think the more kind of an agile worldview you'll have, so you can plug into a lot of different organizations. But I think for me, now having left government, one of the most important lessons that I wish I had known to be true earlier is that I think that in the same way our parents had the Peace Corps, our parents' generation had the Peace Corps, and more recently, more and more of our peers went into programs like Teach for America to engage urban environments, resource environments, and rural environments that had schools that needed investing in. A new tour of service and a tour of duty is called upon, I think, for this modern generation, and that is rotating service between tech and the government, the private sector and the government. I think the way in which technology is exploding and transforming our lives, a lot of our lawmakers and our governing bodies really want to have a sense of how to maintain responsibility around it. But it's so technical and it's so fast moving that unless you have people with the government mentality embedded in the private sector, there won't be really an understanding of how you can work together. And similarly, if you don't have people with that know-how of AI or how data protection works embedded in the government, you're not going to have really smart or balanced regulations that can both protect consumers and workers in a way that still allows business to thrive. And so I think if I have advice for anybody that's thinking about careers in which they really want to make an impact and serve in some capacity, the private sector and public sector are not mutually exclusive. And in that same spirit of always taking the meeting, I would encourage people to show up for both tours of duty if they can make it happen.
Well, folks, you heard it here. The call to action for our generation, working with the private and public sector. Pretty good advice there from Vikram. And Vikram, lastly, I want to open the floor up to you, man. Any questions you have for us here, leaders, or even myself. I don't want this to be a one-sided interview. I want to be working with you as well, man.
Yeah, no, dude, I appreciate it, and I'm sorry for rambling. I think that pretty much sums up the advice from my perspective. I would just say to anyone who's a fan of this conversation, or for of Real Leaders, or of anyone, of the magazine, or just like leadership in general, and trying to kind of improve self and improve the communities around them. Not to make this a political thing, but it is important for folks to show up in their communities. And we're just a few weeks away from an election. I think it's important for people to register and vote, but at the same time, if it's not your bailiwick to really get involved in politics or get involved in what politicians might be saying or what's being said on cable news, get involved in your community, get involved at a local community garden, get involved in ways in which you can make sure that those that don't have access to food are maybe able to have access to food. Sign up to mentor through organizations like Big Brothers Big Sister. If you are a professional, a company, certainly kids after school would love to hear what you're up to. There's a lots of ways to be a leader, and I don't think it requires being on the cover of magazines or being in elected office. It just requires showing up. So thanks for an opportunity to connect with your audience around all these issues, man.
Absolutely. Vikram, you got a podcast. Where am I sending folks?
That's right. Outside of Postmates, completely unrelated to that world, I do have a podcast. It focuses on how American identity is changing in real time, particularly as these cultural debates swirl in our nation. It's called American Enough, examining how American identity is being measured up against, are you from a certain country who's qualified enough to be here? Are you fit enough to serve in our military? Are you enough of an American ally based off of how our geopolitics is changing under this president? So you can check it out wherever you podcast, iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, Android. So American Enough. Be sure to like it, subscribe if you get a chance.
Right on. Well, that wraps it up for this episode 11 with Vikram Iyer, the VP of Global Public Policy and Strategic Communications for Postmates. Trust the process, like my guy Joel Embiid did. Trust the process. And just like we had in this podcast today, Postmates, they sure deliver. There's no doubt about that. So thank you, Vikram, for hopping on this call and delivering that spiel.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate it.
All right, Vikram. Take care.
Take care.